Hello everybody, this is Loki or WayOfLoci and welcome to the No Hit Podcast. Here it is my job to interview extraordinary gamers in the realms of challenge running, whether that be no hit runs, completing games in their entirety without taking a single hit or point of damage, speed runs, completing games that would normally take hours in mere minutes, and other such ventures. Today's guest is trus0und, that's TRUS0UND on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. True is no hit runner of the games from Software, including Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and current venture into Sekiro. Having completed the SL1 No Hit Run, requiring completing the game no hit whilst never leveling up the character, and going on to complete all bosses no hit in the game. True is also the founder of Team Widers, a community of dedicated challenge runners, which has since gone on to do various events, as well as gone on to raise more than $10,000 in charity events, member fundraising for various causes. In this conversation, we go through True's introduction to the Dark Souls series, approach to and difficulties in these no hit runs, the mentality challenges when completing no hit runs, True's video game collection in retro gaming, as well as True's own involvement in charity raising, which has resulted in True shaving his head for charity, as well as the Australian tradition of a shoey, which I will let True explain later. I hope you enjoy this conversation with trus0und. Right, True, appreciate taking the time out for this. Welcome to the podcast. How's it going, dude?
Yeah, doing good, Loki. Thanks so much for having me, man. It is definitely an honor. I appreciate you having me on.
It's no worries at all. I wanted to start with something I found just whilst I was doing some prep of this, which was to do with collection-wise. As I noticed, you had some quite nice GameCubes and like orange theme, purple theme, and was just wondering if collection is a thing you do and if it has a theme or how it started.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely. I've always been a big fan of video games, obviously. And ever since, I suppose in the last few years, really, I got into more retro gaming, but you can call GameCube retro now. It's GameCube in particular, I like collecting old Nintendo stuff in some ways. That's where I probably would spend the most of my money on retro stuff, being like I have like an old NES, which I never had one of those as a kid or anything like that. My first console was PlayStation 1 when I was a little kid, and I remember we went to the store with my parents and we were so excited to get an N64, and we came home with the PlayStation. So yeah, it was that was a disappointment, but ultimately it's funny how that defines who you are as a gamer ultimately, because I have every PlayStation and I'm such a huge PlayStation player up until, in fact, I would say streaming is the only thing that really changed me to PC gaming. I was very casual. So, but yeah, the story goes that I didn't ultimately end up with anything Nintendo except for the Game Boy, so the handheld stuff, when I was a kid. So now I sort of started collecting stuff, and GameCubes are pretty cheap, like here, and we get Japanese stuff really cheap here because of the distance from us to Japan is fairly low compared to everywhere else in the world. So I would pick, I decided to pick up some stuff that was pretty rare and I hadn't seen before, and that orange GameCube's probably my favorite of the of the collection in that regard. But I have some other stuff as well, and I like to restore older consoles, and I spend a lot of time in my free time sort of working on stuff like that. I've done different hardware modifications to different consoles to get different, more clean output to video, and I have some old CRT TVs that arguably is the way that these consoles were made to be played. So yeah, I really get into it in that regards. It's definitely a great hobby, though. I haven't really shown too much of it on stream. It's the sort of thing I just do in my downtime.
So it's not just like taking them to a store or anything, that you're actually physically fixing them up yourself.
Oh yes, yeah. So I'll spend a lot of time. There are these weird YouTube channels that are like ASMR channels where they fix stuff. I certainly don't do it in any ASMR style, but I take them apart. I like to clean the shells as much as I can, and you sort of learn these different tricks about how to get them looking as close to as restored as possible. One of the hardest things that you'll find is any GameCube you buy has this what's called a jewel on top, and it's basically where the GameCube logo is on top, and it's always destroyed. Like it's scratched into oblivion. And so there are a number of different things you can do, but like for that example, sometimes they're irrecoverable. You know, it's got like a pretty deep cut into it, or like almost like a gash into it. But if you've just got one that's just really scratched, you know, that sort of thing you can polish, and it takes some time and work, you know, because you don't want to sort of wear it down too much. So it's sort of almost a by hand sort of thing, but ultimately you can end up with a pretty sparkly GameCube jewel there, which you know, if you get the right collection of parts from various GameCubes, you can sort of put together a really nice showpiece, I guess. But in terms of the other modifications, yeah, they're often sort of like hardware mod chips or something like that pulls the digital signal off the video processor inside the console and converts that to RGB, which is it's uncommon in the USA, but in the UK you guys would know it because it has it's essentially a SCART input, and that's sort of how I've been playing. Well, recently, I guess a lot of my time's gone into getting the N64, the SNES, and the PlayStation 1 all RGB modded so that I can run them on my CRT that I've got here, which accepts an RGB input. So because you get such a more defined color, and you know, I try and find the best sort of variant of the console that performs as sharp as possible. And there's a number of different things. There's some really good YouTube channels out there that sort of talk about this sort of stuff. One that I would highly recommend looking at if you're into this sort of thing is My Life in Gaming. They're one of my favorite YouTube channels. They have a ton of stuff on you know, retro video games as well as like video game preservation. And sometimes it's just nice to play the original. You know, I mean, you look at what happened recently with GTA, you know, and the trilogy that just came out. I think it's. This is why video game preservation is so important, right? Because you end up with this, I guess, tarnished version of what you know, of what once was. Whereas, you know, like for me, yeah, you know, to be able to own the physical copy of a game that came out, you know, 25 years ago or something like that, and be able to put that in and play it, you know, it's as it was intended at the time, and I feel like you sort of get something special from that. Maybe it's not for everybody, but it's certainly one of my it's definitely one of my hobbies for sure.
One last question on this retro aspect before we move into challenge running. From those old consoles, what would you say would be your favorite game from each of them?
So I guess I'll start with the SNES. There's definitely two that stand out for me on the SNES. It would be Super Mario World and The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I'm a huge Legend of Zelda fan, but I don't know what it is. Something specific about that one Mario game is just my favorite. I think it's because I once was handed down an SNES when I was a kid from my cousin, and that was one of the games on there, and I just really enjoyed it. It was one that I remember playing a lot when I was younger. The N64, it's Ocarina of Time. It's basically I actually own one of my prized possessions in terms of collectibles is the US collector's edition of Ocarina of Time. I paid. I was lucky enough that I bought it a few years ago. The US, when you pre-ordered Ocarina of Time collector's edition, you got a special like box with it with like a textured front, which they didn't do anywhere else in the world that I'm aware of. And it's like it's like shiny and textured and like it's like a hard front on the N64 cover. I didn't see that anywhere else, but I mean at the time I think I paid about 250 USD and I got both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask from the US at that point. But the Ocarina of Time is my favorite, and it's crazy because I mean I take the booklet out and inside that it's the receipt from Toys R Us from 1997 for the pre-order. So it's just cool to have that, you know. It's sort of that I love. It's you know, it's something I probably never let go of. But I'm glad I bought it a few years ago because right now there's a huge boom in video game. I don't know what you would call it, whether it's a scam or whether it's just like, you know, shilling. It's becoming very hard for somebody like me to go out and pick up something that I actually want to without spending a lot of money. So, I mean, something I don't have in my collection is Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow in box condition. You know, and to get those games now, it's in anything that's reasonable for a collector is, I mean, it's ridiculous now. So yeah, that would be that for the N64. But yeah, just the prices are insane now for some of the stuff. In terms of the PlayStation, my favorite game on PlayStation 1 would probably be Crash Bandicoot 2, even though my first ever game I owned was Crash Bandicoot 1. Something about Crash Bandicoot 2 was always my favorite, but then also on the flip side of that, the one I've played more in my life would be Metal Gear Solid. That was another one I spent a lot of time playing as a kid with my cousin through summer holidays when I was younger. So it's definitely those would be my favorites on those older consoles for sure.
Oh, Crash 2 is nostalgia, although I also can never forgive it for that final boss fight.
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, it's kind of crazy, you know. I go back and play it all the time, and I often have it. If I'm streaming with no green screen, I'll often have it on my CRT TV in the background, like just running the loop.
I
And
knew
it's
I
just
recognized
beginning.
it. Sorry, I was
Yeah,
doing some
yeah.
prep and I was like, I saw it moving and I knew I recognized it. I just didn't know what it was from.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's just crazy because you know you look at what the you see all the different things like the polar bear level where you ride the polar bear. Oh, this always will stick in my memory. That as well as the jetpack level was something I had when I was a kid. Like I felt like it took me ages to get to that fifth world where it's sort of where that jetpack level was sort of introduced, but it was so cool because it was so they took it so much further than the first game in so many great ways. It's I feel for people that didn't really get to experience it for what it was back when Naughty Dog were making it. You know, it's sort of I don't feel like they capture that now. You know, Toys for Bob, who now make it, are doing a great job for sure with what they did, especially with the remakes. They were very faithful to the original, and those were a ton of fun to play. But Crash 4, it didn't hook me enough. You know, I haven't played through that, but also, unfortunately, I am on the a Souls addict now, so it's really hard to play anything other than Souls.
Yeah, it's keeps you in and let you stay there.
It's a vicious cycle for sure.
Just a little point on the collection thing. I'm quite unfamiliar on the general area, but there was a good video by Karl Jobst about
That's
the
right. Yeah.
retro collection market kind of thing, which I'd recommend for anyone watching if you want to look more into that quotation scam, as I don't know, like legally, whether you can call it that because I'm just not sure about it. But yeah, there's a really good video he made on that.
Yeah. Without spoiling too much of that long video, essentially the people that are involved with there's in collectibles, grading is a huge thing, right? Because it's something that sort of guarantees a collector that what they're buying is what they're getting. I have a bunch of trading cards which are graded by PSA. PSA are essentially the premier grading company that's sort of known worldwide. Them and BGS, they are sort of the premier sort of grading companies, which people are like sort of trust in knowing that if you get something that's gem mint, it's going to command an extremely high price because typically it's going to be in perfect condition, but also look very attractive in the way that the presentation is. So like not scented weirdly or something like that, right? So one of in the Karl Jobst video, basically the reason that they feel it may be a scam is that the grading company and the auction site that are involved with one another in some way. So, you know, it sort of benefits them to sort of hike prices, I guess.
It's definitely an interesting one. Like I didn't look into it at all until I saw that video, just because I've watched a lot of his videos, and even I like enjoyed it and was hooked by it. So both very interesting and very interesting the way he presented the video as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to Hitless, what was the first introduction to Hitless or no hit running for you?
Oh well, it's super easy. Dark Souls 3 was my entry into the Souls series, and in fact, after sort of I guess So when I started streaming, you sort of to go a roundabout way of sort of explaining this. When you start streaming, at least in my experience, you start by sort of doing variety typically, unless you've got like a lot of direction and you just want to do something. Maybe you get into the Souls community and you just want to stream Souls, so you do that, right? Yeah, I started and I had this idea that, I was going to play all these old games I loved. And I was going to share that with people and people were going to love that. And it was all going to work out. And, that's what I was going to do as a streamer. I was going to do retro stuff. That was going to be fine. And I did that for a while. And you find out pretty quickly you have to sort of dive into a niche. And so I spent a lot of my time playing Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. But as you get further into that, you sort of dive into more difficult things, right? Let's do the game with 3 hearts only, let's do the game. Let's run to Ganon straight away and see if we can beat that, right? Just as it is, because you can go straight to the final boss or whatever. Or on master mode when they introduce that, so the sort of hard mode, how quickly can we get to the first Lionel on the Great Plateau and beat that when we have barely any weapons and like no health, right? So there's that sort of grew me into sort of more doing challenges, and then I started to meet people, and we sort of saw Dark Souls, and I saw people play Dark Souls, and I never really understood why. Like I didn't really understand Dark Souls 3 the first few times I watched it, right? It looked grim, it looked grey, and I was like, what's the story to this game? Like, why are we doing this? Because it can be very it can be very hidden, especially if you're just watching it on stream and somebody's just doing something in particular and nobody seems to talk to you, or there doesn't seem to be anything really happening, right? So it was interesting, but one of my close friends, Anna, she started playing Dark Souls 3 and she actually enjoyed it. And so I watched her play it a bit, and I sort of got to the point where I'd given it a little bit more of a chance, and I was like, well, look, I mean, I actually feel like I could be pretty good at this game. This is something where I just got this feeling that I would be all right at it. And so I started with Dark Souls 3, and that was the first Dark Souls game I got into. And from there, I think after Dark Souls 3, I played Sekiro next. I have played them all now, and I think Dark Souls 2 was the last of the lot that I played. But Sekiro was a disaster, dude. It was I did the worst ever recorded Sekiro run. Basically, parrying was not a thing. Even though I got through my first playthrough of Dark Souls 3, I got decent-ish at parrying. I got my head around what it was supposed to feel like, mostly due to the Pontiff fight. But but in Sekiro, I just had no way of so I did a hit and run, like it was sort of and everything took 1,000 years to beat, right? Because that's just not how you're supposed to play the game. Like, you can play the game any way you want, but if you want to really enjoy the game, you have to buy into the mechanics of Sekiro's combat system.
Yeah, I think it was a thing of people who like played Dark Souls prior were actually more a hindrance, because like we went into it going, oh, I know how From Software works. It's dodging this, dodging that, and it was like, but people who went in there fresh was like, oh, it's telling me to parry, I should listen to the game.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, I guess that sort of it's interesting because when you look at Elden Ring, which we some of us had the opportunity to play last week, that is totally like that, right? You go in and it's an evolved version of the combat system of Dark Souls 3. It feels more modern, but it is, for all intents and purposes, Dark Souls 3's combat system, and you get into it and you'll know what you're doing. They've invested a lot of Dark Souls 3 into Elden Ring to give themselves the time to get the rest of the game to the size that it is. That in itself is something that's a bit different about Elden Ring. For Sekiro, for sure, I remember fighting the Sword Saint Ishin at the end, and just the 3 phases. Like I just had to. I was just running around that field for I think it took me 45 minutes to just go through those 3 phases, which is just ridiculous. It's having fought through a lot of the game again, and it's the current game I'm working on for No Hit for the any percent. You know, some of those fights don't take that long. It's just, you know, it's all precision. It's not, it doesn't need to take that long, but you really have to, yeah, the combat system is, you know, is reflex based more than anything. So it's, you know, in that respect, I feel like it certainly is so different, right? And that's why that was really the worst ever run recorded of Sekiro, I believe. Thankfully, I don't think that exists on the internet anymore. But from there, I think I played Dark Souls 1 after that, and then I went back to Dark Souls 3, and I decided that I would do Deathless, right? Which is, you know, I remember saying, yeah, I'll probably never do Hitless. You know, I remember saying that at one point. The challenge running itself sort of bug catches on. If you start to get, you know, you start to get these, you get that taste of what it's like to go through the game without dying. You know, it's pretty crazy to get through that and feel like, you know, that when you reach that peak, it's something else for sure. And I remember going from that and being like, well, I guess now we do Hitless, and Hitless was so different. You know, you don't really know, you know, when you go into it that it's going to be as different as it is, but it really is. You know, Deathless, you really are, you know, boosting vigor a lot, your HP, you know, and we've had some funny occurrences of people sort of coming in and into chat over the last 2 years that I've been involved with this sort of thing, and you know, they say things that are just utterly ridiculous, like, you know, Hitless is easy because you don't have to put any points in vigor, right? Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for the advice, dude. But you know, it's just some ridiculous stuff like that. But it really is. There's a ton to know. And Dark Souls 3 is, I mean, of the ones I've done, I'd say Dark Souls 3 felt like the hardest of the ones that I've done so far. I think maybe because it's fairly long. I know you can do it quickly, but when you go through your first any percent, it was taking me close to 3 hours for a run, which is a decent length in terms of the From Software games. And I'm speaking specifically about the sort of Soulsborne Akiro container there, because obviously their no hit is sort of graduating to be more of a category that can encompass anything now, which is really cool. Yeah, I would say that Dark Souls 3, it certainly was, from what I've heard from other runners as well, one of the more difficult of the lot, right? Sekiro, which I'm learning at the moment, is tough, but I think that's more just the learning curve of getting it down. I don't think that ultimately, I'd say that there's maybe 2 or 3 boss fights that present themselves as potentially being more difficult, and the rest is sort of fairly straightforward if you just execute the strats well, right? That's just my opinion of it at the moment. So you know, particularly the Genichiro fight, Genichiro 2, the Guardian Ape. From what I've learned so far, it's really just a matter of you know, if you can get that first phase done, like in that snap, you know, in that chance that you have at the beginning to sort of get you know, a free phase 1, that fight is fairly straightforward, right? It's just about not missing any of your parries then in phase 2. So, and his move set is less frantic at that point. But you know, Ishin is pretty ridiculous. You know, but such a thrilling game to play in that manner. You know, there's such satisfaction I get from that combat system. It's very, very precise, and it's super satisfying when you do manage to, you know, get through the fights and all of your reactions have been on point, and you get a no-hit fight there. It feels really good for sure.
I was gonna say, enjoying playing it now more so than the first experience.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. It's you know, look, I would say that I would say Sekiro as an any percent is probably I would say that that's probably much easier than, say, an Immortal Severance run. I feel like some of the stuff that you would get after the you know, after that crossroads where you can either choose to sort of go Shura or take on some of the stuff after Fountainhead, I feel like some of those fights are pretty insane. You know, like, but even particular the owl fights, you know, look pretty nuts. And Sword Saint Ishin, and probably ultimately harder than Fire Ishin, right? But
definitely, I think.
yeah, it's but it's going to be relative to anyone's experience as well. Ultimately, right? It's that's one of the big things about no hit is if you've got more experience in one game, it's going to be objectively easier for you, right? So that's really where it's at. But yes, definitely enjoying it a ton.
I want to stay on this for just a sec with DS3. So your introduction to DS3 was from watching your friend stream it. How was that first experience, just doing a vanilla playthrough of DS3? And then the progress from that to doing it deathless.
Yeah, I mean, so Dark Souls 3, the original playthrough was pretty. I mean, from what I remember from it, I just really enjoyed myself. You know, I think the main roadblock for me was probably Pontiff. That was the first real wall I hit there. I'd seen other people get stuck on, say, like Abyss Watchers and stuff like that. For me, Pontiff was the first time I felt like I was really getting my ass handed to me, right? It was like didn't matter where you sort of stood in the fight, like he had moves to sort of cut back around himself if you were behind him, and he would, you know, he hits you that way because he's dual wielding, you know. So and then, you know, it's funny now in Hitless, you know, we one cycle Pontiff, we don't worry about the Phantom or whatever. But you know, back then it was sort of like, you know, you got through the first phase, which was difficult enough, and then there was two of them. Like, you know, it was sort of it's a great fight for sure. But that I recall that being sort of the real first wall, and I recall Soul of Cinder also being insane, right? Like, it's like, despite the fact that, in fact, you know what, that actually probably isn't true. I'm misremembering that. I think Soul of Cinder was for sure almost like from a vanilla playthrough perspective, it was deceptively easy, you know, because when you can tank hits off Soul of Cinder, you know, the mistakes don't matter, right? Ultimately, especially in a normal playthrough, right? And I remember going back to it in Deathless and just getting destroyed, you know, or particularly in Hitless, and we'll come to it. But yeah, it was easily the hardest fight in the run, in the any percent for sure. Outside of that, I don't remember struggling with any of the other bosses though. Not, and I may have done, but I don't really remember it. I'm trying to think. It's so weird. It was such a while ago now, and I've played so many hours of Dark Souls 3. It's hard to think back and, you know, and remember from that vanilla playthrough. That's one thing that's sort of I guess the saddest parts about these runs is that, you know, you only get that first playthrough once. So it's you know, I always wish I could have that back. And that's sort of what's one of the things that's really exciting about Elden Ring, and got a little taste of that last week. So it's crazy to know that we'll get that experience again. And I don't want to do too many spoilers for Elden Ring or anything like that for anyone listening, but you know, you get into it and there's at least one boss fight just in the network test alone that was like, damn, I'm getting my ass handed to me again. And it's you know, that's the thrill of it. You know, it's sort of you know, really fun for sure.
It's just weird now that we've got, at least at this point in the recording, it's now 4 months away, which is pretty sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally it's on the 25th of February, right? So yeah. December, January, February, so 3 months, just over 3 months. Yeah. So the hollowing will be over at that point. But you know, it's sort of, from what I've played of Elden Ring, it's, you know, I was lucky enough to do probably 14 of the 15 hours that were available, and yeah, it's just, you know, I can say nothing bad about it. It's got some technical issues that need to be fixed for sure, and that's great that we were able to give feedback to From Software about it directly. In particular, there's one there was one enemy that had, let's say, a generous hitbox, like as in they would do a shield slam and you could have been standing probably
Oh,
10
I think
to
I've seen
15 meters.
footage of this.
10,
Yeah.
10 to 15 meters from him, and you'd get hit. It was a one hit kill. So it felt very unfair. So that's and that I remember being like, yeah, this is broken. like you'd even be on the other side of like he would shield slam in a different direction from you. And and you'd still die. It was almost like unfair. But it's I'm unsure whether or not I just didn't understand the mechanic, or whether or not the hitbox was just over the top, right? So I also think this enemy is not supposed to be there. Like I feel like this enemy is actually supposed to be semi late game, just based on what I've been able to read up about, and I think they just sort of put him there at the start.
Because they give you like a build at the start, so you're relatively upgraded already, like ready for that kind of boss. Even though the damage that was seen wasn't the greatest for him.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, he's not there in the gameplay preview, right? So if you look at that what we got to see from FromSoft, he's not there in the gameplay preview, but you do see him in the gameplay preview in a different area, right? So anyway, I don't want to spoil too much for anybody. I'm sort of trying to be as vague as possible here, but in that respect, it's sort of exciting to have to have that coming up where we get that experience again. But even better, I feel like more people are going to get this experience because Elden Ring's story and lore seems to be more upfront, but also the characters are way more talkative, right? It feels like they have done a ton more voice acting. Obviously, your character's mute as usual, but like the player character for whatever reason, except for screaming when they die. But the characters that we were able to meet in the network test were very talkative. Like they had plenty to say about the lore and things like that. And that for me, I feel like that's going to be enjoyable for more players, right? Just because that more people are going to be able to really get into it and understand that there is a story there, and you're not just sort of like playing to beat bosses, because that's kind of how I felt when I first played Dark Souls 3, right? And also, I would say Dark Souls 3 always sort of looked grim and depressing. I see the beauty in it now because I've spent so much time with it, and I sort of see the world for what it is, and it's how the story of Dark Souls 3 is really told. But Elden Ring it's a totally different experience. It's a vast world that's colorful and full of life, and there's animals running around everywhere, and you don't have to fight all the time. It's you get to go to the beach. And From Software have upgraded the skybox so much. It's just a stunning vista. That you get to explore. It's very much like Breath of the Wild for me, but probably even better, right? And Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games, but this is like that in terms of the open world, but done better. Like they've taken from the experience of the open world in Breath of the Wild, where it can be quite empty at some points, right? Because it's a Nintendo Switch game and they have limited resources to use, but especially with draw distance and everything like that. But Elden Ring, everything feels like it's alive, and that for me is something that really excites me, because I feel like I get to play both of my favorite games, both of my favorite games of the last few years sort of melded together into this like perfect marriage of awesome. So yeah,
the one thing or last thing I'll say about Elden Ring, which talk about in terms of no hit runs in the traditional, like the previous From Software games, and going, DS2 is the biggest, it's got 41 bosses. I feel like this one's gonna laugh at that, and because
it feels like it. Yeah, look, I mean, I would tend to agree. Yeah, it's. Look, I mean, I can say it in the small portion of the map that we got to play in Elden Ring, there was 10 mini bosses, right? Or essentially 10 bosses, which I think they ultimately will all be mini bosses ultimately. But you look at that, and it's sort of from what I can understand, we really only got like a sixth or an eighth of the map, and if it's as if it's as vast as that, we could be looking at 80 plus bosses. It's just which is a lot if you're doing an all bosses run. But I think I'm pretty sure Little Laggy did manage to do a boss rush speed run of the network test. I think it only took 23 minutes. Nico was telling me about this a couple of days ago, so I think he did it pretty quick. But you do start off with a cookie cutter character in the network test, and the scaling could be all off. Like From Software could have changed a ton. We don't know what the final game's going to look like ultimately, or if we even start in the same area or anything. So, but I would agree. Yes, it seems to me like the crown of that Dark Souls 2 super long, that Otstava run that was done, it seems to me like that might back up for grabs. Somebody else is going to take the crown on that, and it will be Elden Ring for sure.
And assuming there's no Breath of the Wild-esque straight to the final boss in the game, potentially be also the longest any percent as well, if it has certain factors such as having to complete certain bosses in different areas in order to complete. So it could be the longest any percent as well, potentially.
I believe so. Look, I mean, I don't want to go too much into speculation about like the structure of the way that the game will go, just because I've read stuff that could be right or wrong, and I'm not going in blind. Obviously, I've played 15 hours of the network test, so or 14 hours, but also I've sort of read stuff that is being leaked as well, so I sort of have a general idea of what we're going to be looking at. But ultimately, this is one thing that I've said. There's a lot of people obviously are going to be in the race at the start to see who can do it first. This could easily be 8 to 12 hours of any percent. Like if that's the minimum it takes, like if there's no faster way, to sort of do it, especially with no hit being glitchless, like typically, right? There may be this may be very long, any percent, right? Just to get to the end, because it's such a big world, and there might be, you may have to go for miles to collect something that you need that's integral to the strategy.
Yeah, this is going to be a completely different kind of routing than any of the previous ones have been, which have been a lot more like linear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we simply don't really know enough yet, I guess, about what it's going to be. And it's interesting to me to look back at the history of these runs, because you look at, I think Dark Souls 3 took quite some time for the first any percent to be successfully achieved. I forget, there's a good Squilla made a great video about the sort of the history or the ongoing history of the no hit run or the hitless runs. So that was interesting because he's talked about that, and I'm pretty sure it was months and months and months from release before somebody actually got it right. Faraz was the first. Even Sekiro, I'm fairly sure Gino was the first to get a damageless Sekiro run. I could be wrong,
so.
but I think that was still 2 months. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking I still think there was a fair chunk of time before somebody actually did it. This could be another one where it's months and months before getting it, and I'm really torn between trying to be a part of that race and just enjoying the experience. It's sort of that's a really tough it's a tough thing for me in my to sort of figure out what it is. I'm lucky enough to have at least a few weeks off work at the beginning so that I can just really engross myself in this world. But yeah, who knows what's gonna come of that? I personally hope it's a big long run. Like I really would like it to be. I'd love for it to be like that, and have plenty of people in the race rather than just people that are really experienced with no hit running, like first, like straight away, like on it, get the world record and be done. Like, and it's like okay, like before anybody really else has a chance to sort of have a look at it. I would love for it to be different from that and be like a really long run, and have a ton of intricacy to it, and something that the community can all come together to sort of put, like the different strats learn together and sort of like, be a bit more of a competition overall. That to me would be really cool.
And if it ends up being like that, I wish the best of luck to Nico and Hob for their God Run 3.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, what can I say? It's, those are long runs anyway, but, look, these guys are, at the top of what they're doing. And, we can't forget Dobby as well. Dobby
Yeah,
Summer,
of course.
the first to achieve the God Run too. So, I mean, I look at it now and I was sort of thinking, maybe I'll get into the marathon running side of things next year. That was sort of on my list of goals, but at the moment, like, I'm just happy to I'll probably focus on Elden Ring before I even do Dark Souls 1, which I haven't done yet. So because it's so close, I just don't know if I'm going to have the time between now and then to sort of refine a run and get it done, especially with Sekiro sort of halfway done at this point. So we'll see.
If I bring us back to DS3, what was the learning aspect, or should more so actually, what was the trickiest parts of the run during the journey to get that no-hit run?
With Dark Souls 3, it was pretty interesting how many different phases I went through in terms of thinking or feeling good about it and feeling awful about it. It took me 170 days, almost, I think it was exactly 170 days to get my first no-hit run of Dark Souls 3. And I went to Solar Cinder with 0 hits 7 times before I got it. I thought it was never going to happen at that point. Do you know what I mean? It was, I felt like it was really not happening at all. So the really interesting thing about it was, I guess to begin with, I think the routing was fairly straightforward, just because I had already done Deathless and sort of gotten an idea of the route that I wanted to take anyway. So I sort of understood that. But and I remember the first boss I really spent any time just like resetting on and practicing was obviously Gundyr, right? The Udex Gundyr, because it was right there. It was the first thing I wanted to sort of like understand if I could actually do it hitless. And I remember doing, like, on my first day, just going through it and then getting it sort of once and twice, or then twice back to back. And then, I started to feel confident because I was able to sort of do that to begin with, like straight away. I know it's the tutorial boss, but it's sort of, you do need to get into this repetition of understanding sort of what the boss does and what to expect. And, particularly with things like understanding the posture meter that's not visible to the player, but you have to sort of maintain a momentum. Otherwise, you don't get the same opportunities that you do if you just sort of like, if you hesitate. I guess that's the the Sekiro tagline, isn't it? Hesitation is defeat. But but there's a you do have to stay on top of some of these bosses to get the opportunities that you want, or for the fight to be consistent, right? But yeah, the routing overall, it was, that was pretty straightforward. I do remember having trouble with the Abyss Watchers, definitely, or even Vort to begin with. I remember there was stages where I had, I would get hit by Vort every time, like I would at least be taking a hit at Vort. And then, there was different things where I'd get hit running through a certain area, say particularly getting the strategy down for, say, the catacombs to get the Karthus blood ring, which gives you extra iframes. In particular, understanding and learning where everything is and knowing that, okay, there's like 5 blobs on the wall that you can't see that is here, and here. You go through, and it's funny, you sort of, every time you run it, you learn something new, sort of, and even when you think you've got it, there are still lessons to be learned. There's a ton of things where, I've been running through and something happens and it's like, okay, well, even after all these hours, I didn't know that was going to happen, right? Or that could happen. And, I'd say the hardest running section was probably, there are 2 that come to mind that always stress me out, particularly the stairs, the whole Irithyll section is just, even with the branch section. So there's a section of Irithyll. Those of you that don't run DS3 or haven't seen it, there are sort of 2 sections to Irithyll prior to Pontiff. You got the first section where you can sort of use a branch to camouflage yourself and get most of the way through the first section, which is great, but can still be stressful if you don't get the enemy positioning you need, particularly if one of the hollows is close to where you are, sort of as you get up to the there's almost like a square in the middle with like a fountain, and if they're close to the stairs, they can even see you if you're moving in the white branch camouflage. But the second set of stairs is the worst part, right? Like that, there is so much going on, and even with the strategies that other people had, I never felt confident, and it was because there are dogs everywhere, and the dogs are the worst part of these games for running sections,
especially in DS3 with teleporting, especially in like on the way to Deacons.
Yeah, another running section which is awful, and I lost so many runs. You sort of get that far, and I think at the Deacons, trying to remember because it's been so long since I played Dark Souls 3. And I don't remember my list of things, but I'm fairly sure that I'd already done the dancer at that point, and we would already have probably run I think we'd be at +9 at that point, potentially. So we go past the dancer, you run and get all of the chunks that you need, and you level up to +9. I believe I do that before the sage in my route. So yeah, because then the sage is pretty straightforward. I might be getting confused just because the most recent run that I spent a lot of time on was the SL1 run of Dark Souls 3, and that's quite different in what you expect out of the what you expect out of the weapon. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I was still going from Wolnir to Dancer, and then on, like I'd just do the chunk hunt, we call it, so that we get the all of the Titanite chunks to get to +9. And that way, then you get a quick Archdeacon at the end of the Deacon's fight, right? Especially if you're doing Twin Blades meta, which I should probably preface by saying I did go with the Twin Blades for that run. But it took a long time, and there were a lot of runs I lost to Deacons. To be honest, I feel like every boss has its chapter. Right, where it was really tough. I don't know that there's really any boss that didn't have a time that I felt like it was in my mind, for at one point or another. Like even the sage did at one point. There was. Well, maybe not Gundyr, because you're just there at the start, right? And it's just, you sort of just get past him and then you're done. But I can recall the Sage did, the Deacons certainly did. From that, after Deacons, we then go to Irithyll, probably do Yorm. I think I was doing that first, going through the through the jail down to Yorm. And Yorm I learned to do with the Twin Blades first, rather than doing the Storm Ruler, which I actually felt pretty comfortable with, but there was tons of times I got hit by Yorm because of the stomp, right? Like that,
speedy stomp.
and yeah, exactly. So it's very fast, and you sort of, it takes time to understand how much positioning difference you want from him, and sort of like giving yourself the time to be far away. It's so there was that, and then Aldrich had its times. Then there was the Prince's Stairs. It was always just a disaster until I found something that worked well for me, and then Solar Cinder, which I think is still, is by far the hardest, of the boss fights. I remember to even get somewhat understanding of the fight, I remember spending multiple weekends just in the fight for hours and hours, just to make sure that I sort of understood everything he could do. And then even then, it still took me 7 no-hit runs, all the way there before it would, before I was confident, or before I actually got the run. That's one of the things, I guess, that is really hard about these runs is the pressure for your first run, right? Like that's, especially the more time that goes on, the more the invisible pressure, which doesn't actually exist, happens, right? That's one of the harder parts, really, honestly, is that the pressure that comes in to these, the pressure that you put on yourself in your mind after all this time it's I would say almost like debilitating in such a way that it's you sort of, don't have the same reaction as that you would just in practice by any stretch, especially when the whole run is on the line and it's taken you nearly 3 hours. I can only imagine what it feels like, for people like Hob or Nico, 10 hours in, right? And 3 games down or 4 games down, it's sort of to take each game as a single chunk must be the next level of anxiety, right? But I remember feeling really bad after, the first one, not so much. The second one, a little bit more. The third one, I thought I was going to get it. By the 6th one, I was just like, what am I doing wrong? Like, am I ever going to get this thing? And then when I got it on the 7th, and then I think I got it something like 6 times in 2 weeks. It's sort of like once the pressure was gone, it was like, I knew I could do it. And I guess that's just what comes with the repetition and as you get more consistent, it's sort of, I feel like you have to have Cinder as your best, almost like your best boss before it will, before you'll get it. A lot of people there are people that can get lucky for sure, and just get it early. But if you want to do these, like more of these runs, it will quickly become apparent if you were lucky, I think, right? Because you just will brick wall on this, but also then you don't have the level of pressure on yourself if you've done it already, right? I feel like maybe that's also sort of a blessing in disguise, that you don't have that pressure. So it's long and short of it is, I certainly remember chapters in every part of the run where I had different parts where I was like, okay, I need to really focus on this part because this is just hitting me here every time, and that's where the mentality of it is super important, because you can be your own worst enemy with this stuff.
I think from the runs I've learned and done, DS3 has probably the highest percentage of bosses that are difficult, which by that I mean something like Bloodborne, for instance. It's quite a relatively low percent because quite a few of the bosses are quite systematic in their approach, with like big things like shadows and Murgo, which does take quite a bit of practice. But there is pretty much majority of the bosses of DS3 can be an issue in some way or other, and same probably.
Yeah, I would say from my experience, from what I've seen, I would say you're probably right. Bloodborne is actually the most recent run that I've got, and I think it took, when I actually started running it, I think it only took 10 days in the end. So it was, and it was sort of, it's so short, right? So you get so many shots at it. It's really, and I'm slow. Like, I think it took me an hour and 45 minutes maybe, but look, there are difficult parts of each boss there for sure. But it's not like Dark Souls 3, because you can get through 4 bosses in like 20 minutes in Bloodborne. You'd be lucky to get to the Abyss Watchers in 20 minutes in most cases, right?
Yeah,
like
definitely.
in Dark Souls 3, and maybe you'd even just be past Yorm, not Yorm, Vort. In terms of that, whereas there was a learning curve, but and I don't know how much my experience in other no-hit runs made Bloodborne easier for me to deal with mentally, because I've got good friends out there who've been working on Bloodborne for a long time, and it's their first no-hit run, and they're still going through that journey, and working through those mental hurdles that they need to do to get their runs. And I don't want to belittle how difficult that is, because I know too well, right, how hard it is to get those runs, and it's a personal journey, right? Like that's the thing. But also, I think one of the things that I found really important in all of these runs up to this point is what works for you or what works for somebody else might not work for you, and you don't have to. I feel like there are runners out there who see that there's a strat by this runner that's really good, and it could be anybody. There's a 1,000 examples, like of different strategies that are by really good runners that are arguably the best strategy to run. for whether it be for a boss or a running section or anything like that. I think one of the things that really helped me was to sit back and look at this and sometimes be like, you know what, like, is this the best strategy? Like, is this what works for me consistently? Or should I try and learn something about this that's different? One of the things that I think was super interesting relative to Bloodborne is when I was initially learning it, I was learning from Eden's All Bosses Guide, and he sort of showed two ways to fight the BSB, and there's the Punji strat, but there's also you can fight the BSB head on, right? Like, and that's to me, like, the BSB was the thing I was worried about the most, right? Because it's so frantic and unpredictable. Just because it's sort of just a flaps of skin flying around the arena. So for me, I was like, okay, well, I tried the Punji strat to begin with, and I'd get hit every time because I just wasn't doing it right, and I didn't really understand what I was trying to do. And there's a number of different sort of things you have to consider, like the position of how high up the wall you throw the punji, and being able to count as much time as you have in your head before. And to get that consistent is fairly straightforward, but you have to understand all the nuances of it. So I actually spent a lot of the first sort of week or so when I started running it, and prior to that learning it, fighting the BSB head on. And I think in the run that I actually got, I'd started moving over to the punji strat because there were parts of the just fighting BSB head on strategies that I didn't like, or like I would get pinned against a wall or something like that for whatever reason, and I would just get like hit by poison damage or some sort of AoE that BSB has in later phase. And I recall, I think in the run that I actually got for Bloodborne, the BSB just ignored the punji at one point, and I was like, okay, right, well, so I just ran away and just I changed the strategy to just fight the BSB head on. And if I hadn't learned how to do that as well, I wouldn't have been able to sort of save it. And that's one of the things. You can learn lots about a boss and just have various strategies and sort of come up with your own way to do things that make the best sense for you. Another example is when running to deacons. You mentioned about the dogs, but there's also a couple of different things where you're sort of running, and it's important that you keep the right momentum because there are archers firing at you when you have to like sort of jump across. There's like a ramp that sort of goes up, and just before you get to the grave wardens that can chase you before you go into the door where the giant is. And there would be a number of times where I'd have a great run up to that point, but I would get hit by an archer there in the back, and it's like, so, I sort of spent a lot of time refining that section and just, changing up how many alluring skulls I would use, so that I could then not get chased by a thrall, which is dangerous enough, right? But also take out a number of these archers because I bought myself enough time, so I was guaranteed that they weren't going to hit me in the back, right? And a lot of the time, something can work every time for somebody and they just do something like that. But I found that there was a number of instances where I would go into sections and get hit there after months of doing a run, and it would just really grate on me. I'd be like, well, like, I've been running this for months. Why is this happening now? And like, also then I'd be like, okay, well, look, maybe there's a better way. And I think that that's one of the really important things, is to know that you don't have to stick to the strats that other people have. All right. Just because a strat has been done by somebody that's done incredible things doesn't necessarily mean it's the best strat or it's the best strat for you. These runs are all about finding out what's consistent for you. And I think the more guarantees you can give yourself with strategies, like if you know that something's going to work and it's sort of guaranteed for you that it's going to work, then go with that. Just because somebody does something else doesn't mean that you can't do that. And that was sort of one of the important things for me, because it made me feel way more confident. If I was having a dip in confidence on a run, and then I spent the time to sort of come up with a new strategy, it was exciting to sort of run up to that point and be like, okay, now we're doing the new strategy. And then when it works, it's sort of like that payoff of, okay, we finally overcame that. And sure, you can get hit again in that area by something else, and then you have to refine it further. But it's a lot of time it's fun to just come up with your own your own strategies, but there's there's advice from other runners that you can take to. So I think it's important to be able to sort of not have to stick to the rules, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? It's there's these people are just people too. Despite even Hob, even if even if he doesn't look like a person. No, I'm just kidding. But even people that have done amazing things, are just people in the end of the day that have spent a lot of time on things, and just because they have strategies that work for them in their in their amazing runs doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be the best strategy for you. So
yeah,
a bit of a rant there, but yes.
I'll just add to that by saying you can stick with one strat builds. A really good way to approach it is by viewing either different guides or different runs, as people will have different ways of doing it and testing for yourself which one works for you best. As well as with strats, sometimes you've got to keep in mind that there are sort of small adjustments that go on in your head if you've got a lot of experience with the runs that may not be overly visible, as well as that is only potentially showing one run of this boss in a guide or in a run. So it's also worth thinking about what other things can happen with a run, or what if something went wrong, how would you then react, which might not be shown in a guide.
It can be really hard, honestly. It's like I mentioned with the BSB, right? Knowing how high on the wall you want to throw the punji, right? To get it distracted at the beginning of the fight. It wasn't immediately apparent, pardon me, that had a difference, right? It's like, you just need to throw a punji against the wall here, and it's like the height on the wall it makes a huge difference. But if that that might go unsaid, for one reason or another. And, especially when you're, if you're like in the case of a lot of these guides that, it's sort of, there's a lot to talk about, in some of these guides, unless you specifically go in and I'm doing a comprehensive BSB guide, or I'm doing a comprehensive Soul of Cinder guide, I feel like it can be a bit overwhelming to try and get out everything, because there is so much subtlety to some of this experience that ultimately becomes like subconscious reflexes, right? You're totally right. It's not always easy to not everything is always said in a guide. There is a level of experience that has to sort of tie in with that.
And probably the last thing I'll probably say about it is try to make with certain bosses, at least for me doing Sekiro, it was a big thing of have your own way of recognizing things, as it will make it a lot easier. Because sometimes if you just try and go through a step-by-step thing of how to do it, as opposed to trying to put it in your own words, because there's Ishii and Ashna, and people who have heard me before will find this funny, but Ishii and Ashna, when you're in an attack pattern with him, and first phase of Ishii and Assaulting, actually, when you're in a parry combo with him, he'll either do a 2-hit combo, which is an up-down strike, or a push-thrust combo. And the way I always remembered that was because he has a tell where he either points the sword to the sky for his push-thrust, or he'll put his sword behind him to do like a cricket hit. And that's how I remembered, and that's how I got the pattern down, and that just works for me. And I say that to people, just have your own way of thinking about it, even if it's the same strat, as it sort of just gets ingrained better.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's totally super important, that experience, right? And that's where repetition is really going to help anybody. The practice is super important, and particularly late game bosses like that. If you just run the run over and over and over, you may have tons of experience with the first boss, but none with the last, right? And especially, when you get into that late game high pressure sort of situation, that can be you're relying heavily on muscle memory, and the going through the motions and the repetition of that to get what you're actually want out of the fight. Especially if you're nervous, it's going to make things much better for you, for sure.
Going into extensions of DS3, what was the key differences, apart from the obvious of SL1 and moving into all vanilla bosses?
Yeah, so look, I went to all vanilla bosses pretty much straight away after I got the any percent. And I did run all vanilla for maybe a month or two before I moved to SL1. And I took a break from all vanilla or all base game bosses. For those of you that don't know what all vanilla bosses is all base game bosses. So no DLC bosses, but all the bosses that were released with the base game. That for me was tough. To begin with, I was just doing the any percent and then moving on to like this sort of, I remember there was like 6 additional splits on the split counter, and that was there were two sort of what I would call free bosses almost, being the tree the Curse Rotten Greatwood or Tree Balls as he's affectionately known. And then the ODK, which is they're more or less they're precise enough, but they're they're free more or less. Especially at that stage of the game with that sort of leveling on damage and things like that for the most part. And then I would sort of have it there. They'd be first, and then second set of 2 new bosses would be Osiris and Champion Gundyr. I think Osiris for me was the biggest hurdle. I hated him with a passion. It's just so, especially after Soul of Cinder. I mean, at one point I was doing, I sort of flipped it around. It's like, all right, I'll do Cinder and then I'll do Osiris immediately after, or, and then I was like, oh, you know what? No, I've just come off the stress of doing Cinder. I'll do the 2 free bosses first, and then I'll do, I'll do Osiris. In the end, I ended up doing Osiris early game. Because I was so sick of getting hit by Osiris in the late game that I decided I didn't want to get to late game unless he was done. So I think in the final run that I ended up doing, I actually did Osiris after the chunk hunt, but even before the sage potentially. So the +9 weapon, but it was super early, right? Like as soon as we could get to that area, we did Osiris. And the first run I ever did him that early, I got the run. So it's sort of one of those interesting things where I was able to do that, and then it was just doing the sage and the deacons and whatever else. It was it was super. I felt like I gave myself a lot of buffer, but there was a couple of times where I did get past Osiris late game, and then got hit by Champion Gundyr. Because there are some pretty aggressive attacks that Champion Gundyr can do, especially in his second phase. The phase transition. I lost it to the phase transition, the sort of the charge and spin. I lost the run there multiple times, but I also did get to the Nameless King 3 times. Which I was always running Nameless King as the final boss, because I wanted to have a different final boss for this run. I think I got there 3 times and lost it to the Wyvern.
So the first phase, the King of Storms phase.
Yes. So I mean, and which is kind of ridiculous, right? Like, or at least it seems ridiculous from the perspective of how the different phases are. Arguably, the phase 2 is arguably harder just because the Nameless King is more aggressive, and he can do all sorts of quite fast moves, whereas the big chicken doesn't really do all much. So yeah, I think I mean in multiple times I just it was just nerves, and I mistimed rolls. But yeah, the time, as I say, the time I did Osiris, Osiris early, we went to the Nameless King. I think I recall getting pretty good hits on the Wyvern, like as it sort of sort of got some decent RNG, but got tons of head hits on the Wyvern, and it staggered almost immediately, right? And that to me was, it was like phase 1 was done before I was even really in the fight, and I was like, okay, right, well, I guess we're doing this then, and it's sort of, then you just got to really rely on, can I stay in this and not make a mistake? And greed is a huge thing, right? Yeah. It's sort of you've got to be very there's a huge part of the experience of doing a no-hit run whereby greed and balancing greed with momentum is really important, because you have to know just how much you can do without going over the top, right? Because if you go over the top, you'll almost certainly be punished, and you'll lose a run. Whereas if you don't keep up the momentum, the boss fight may not go as you want it to, and you may end up in a situation that you haven't practiced, which can be, it will always happen during a live run. Do you know what I mean? It's 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 the sort of thing whereby when stuff starts happening that you're not expecting in a live run, it's not good. Not good news.
I think it's a big thing seen in chatters who may not do challenge run or may not be as familiar. Like when you get into that like low health bar range, and it's like, oh, could have finished him there. Whilst in the meantime, like people who have run the game know, no, if he'd gone for another attack there, he would have been like whacked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in the all base game bosses run that I got, he staggered at a weird stage for me. Like usually, I would, like, my stamina management was maybe a little bit off, and the Nameless King staggered, and I didn't have enough stamina to get the additional hits that I wanted before the repost. And so I just went for the repost, and he had health left after that. And I was like, what's going to happen here? You know what I mean? Like, what's he going to do now? Because I'm so used to just finishing it at the repost, and that for me was like, luckily the health was low enough that I was able to sort of get behind him, and he typically will turn to face you before he tries to do anything. So I thought that was a pretty, that was a pretty good chance at least to try and get the run, and ultimately it was fine for me. But had he have had a ton more health, when you get to sort of later phase Nameless King, he adds more attacks, to what he's doing. And particularly if you're used to executing a strat that sort of is pretty consistent and seems to work the same way, there are some attacks that you might get once in a blue moon, which makes it really hard to practice it. And you see people you see runners like Nico, run into things at times where he's like, this is just a once in a blue moon thing, it's really hard to practice for that. I don't know a specific example, but I've certainly seen things where, Nico has so much experience in all of these games, and, there are some attacks that just happen and it's like, oh, okay. Like you can just see that it's like, I wasn't expecting it at all, so.
I think an example, this is not so much a Blue Moon example, but Dragon Slayer armor. In a lot of cases, people will set up to finish it off in phase 1, but if he stalls you for too long or it takes things too long, not many people, including myself, have practiced for that phase 2, so that adds in a whole nother level of stuff that is very unprepared for.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a good point. Just to sort of bring me into the SL1 side of things. Dragon Slayer armor in any percent and all base game bosses, for me, I have 55 dexterity there because I know that I was looking for 55 dex and enough stamina, but ultimately, the reason I wanted that is because I knew that 4 L1s so the fourth L1 would trigger the phase transition, and then at that stage there would be, so I'd hit him 3 times and then I would tee him up for the fourth. On the fourth, I'd do 3 L1s, and then that would give me enough time to sort of get around to the back of him so I don't get hit by the sort of wind attack thing he does as he stands up. I know that at that dexterity level, 5 more L1s will kill him before he can even try and get an attack out, right? So there's little to no chance of the pilgrim butterflies doing anything. Obviously, SL1, not the case. I would say Dragon Slayer armor was one of the hardest bosses in the SL1 run, purely because you have to learn to fight based on sound cues more than anything. And so you'll see a lot of runners that run SL1 will turn all sound off except for the enemy sounds in the Dragon Slayer fight, and that's due to the fact that the pilgrim butterflies have 3. There's one on either side of the bridge, and they have 3 different attacks that they can do, and they can mix them up. One is a laser beam. One is sort of like a hailstorm of meatballs, and then there's one super meatball that can come from either side. And that was the hardest part to learn, was sort of dealing with DSA, knowing what you've got to do to sort of deal with his more aggressive attacking style in the second phase, and also, there's a number of different things he will do whereby he will chain new attacks into things, like where he'll drag the axe along the floor and then try and hit you, and then or he'll try and he'll try and fire like a wind beam at you, or so like a wind sort of slice across at you, and you got to do all of that while also trying to make sure that you're in a position in the arena that gives you some room to move. Like sort of it was tough, and because of that, I moved DSA very early in my run in SL1. So it's that for me was about balancing, certainly about balancing the two. Balancing the pressure of the bosses, and I didn't want DSA right at the end there because it was so difficult. I didn't want to go sort of DSA into the archives and have that running section, and then Solar Cinder pretty much being straight after that. Particularly because there's not on SL1, you're +9 by that point anyway. So there was really no difference fighting DSA late or early, right? So other than, if you get it early, it's like, almost like a quote unquote free pass to the end of the game in some ways, in that DSA is not there anymore. But there's the routing does change a lot between the two. The basics of just getting your weapon to a certain level was really the big focus, right, of SL1 was just the getting the weapon as powerful as possible. And then there was definitely a few changes that made it hard. I can't believe I haven't talked about the dancer in this, because the dancer was definitely one of the harder bosses in both runs. I recall the dancer being quite difficult in my any percent run, and then the leveled any percent, and in SL1 she was even more difficult because you just have so little damage against her, and you just get exposed to so many more attacks, right? And it's the more that you're in the dancer fight, the more chance you get out of position, and the positioning is super important, at least in my experience. So yeah, sort of felt like that was another challenge there. And then Solar Cinder, just a long fight, really. That was that's again, it's like the dancer. I guess it's just that extended time in the fight. Just exposes you to more chances for mistakes, really. And so you have to get even more consistent from there on.
I just want to touch on a common theme that I've sort of just seen with moving bosses earlier, or difficult bosses earlier, so DSA for SL1, Osiris and all Vanilla, and Dancer, although Dancer sort of mixes with getting the +9 for the bosses. Would that be something you recommend or prefer in terms of having the difficulty as soon as possible as opposed to later on?
It really is going to vary from player to player, in that it depends on how you want to weight the run, in terms of difficulty. For me personally, something about having DSA done felt like momentum to me, right? It was sort of I got to a point where it was like, I did Gundyr, Vort, Abyss Watchers, Wolnir, Dancer, DSA, right? And it's like, okay, well, at that point, the Dancer and DSA is done, right? And so, Yorm I was doing with the Storm Ruler in that point, so that wasn't too difficult. Pontiff, we had a decent one cycle on even at SL1, so that was, that felt as free as the leveled any percent, which is pretty crazy, to be honest, that we got any free one cycles at that point. Then and then Aldrich, we also worked out a one cycle that was consistent 99% of the time, provided we got the correct headshots in a certain point. Otherwise, you might have a slither of health left at the end. To me, it was sort of like the bosses that I could one cycle felt almost the same, right, as the normal any percent. But that's why with DSA, it's such a different fight there's so much added to it that it sort of I always felt like I had a shot at the run if DSA was done, whereas somebody else may feel like, they don't want to tackle that until they got everything else behind their belt, because they've got that. But for me, it was sort of like a matter of sort of trying to balance the run in such a way that I felt confident to go on and, sort of like build like if I had DSA done, it was like, okay, sweet, that's done. Like let's get to the end of the game now, because everything else is sort of locked in to some extent. And it's gonna vary heavily from run to run. Like Sekiro, you have really no choice. Do you know what I mean? It's because it's very linear in what you're trying to do, more or less. So, and it depends on the strategies and what you need from it. Like in Sekiro, needing the Mortal Blade, you want to do that probably earlier. If you're using the Mortal Blade. As soon as you can do that, we sort of that, at least in my sure run, we pretty much go for that straight away after
if you're not doing that, you should do it. It's because Mortal Draws just OP.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's particularly good. I don't use it as much as some people do. Like in particular, I don't think I use it at all in the Ish and Ashna fight. But I'm so used to doing the firecrackers, right? Like that's if he tries to do that weird attack that he builds up for a second, that I've just been used to doing firecrackers with that, and I for whatever reason, I think I decided to do that because I saw Hob do it. Which is not necessarily the best reason to do a strat, to be fair, but I watch Hob fight Ish and Ashna more than I've watched anyone, but then I've seen Nico fight him a lot recently and use the Mortal Draw, and I feel like I've seen a couple of instances of Ishin, like, I guess the one thing I worry about is if he doesn't stagger from that for whatever reason and he just hits you really quickly. That's the one thing I worry about with Ishin, is like if he doesn't do something I expect, I feel like it's like over at that point. Like he's just going to like quickly like do something close to me, but I'm pretty inexperienced with Sekiro at this point still, right? It's still very early for me.
Yeah, I'll say if like that's just practice into it and like say experience. If you go into it and try most draws here and there, you'll quickly find out where it is safe or not safe. Like on just a very quick one, after you've done the first phase of Ishin Ashna, just Death Blows Dawn, Yash Sugar, Mortal Draw, simple damage. Like it just sets it up second phase to make him like real squishy and just finish him off real quick in second phase. But yeah, that's the only thing I'll say.
I'm gonna have to try it, yeah, for sure. It's look, I mean, and it's really exciting to be doing Sekiro. I'm looking forward to getting back into it because it's been a while, and it's sort of I did play it for a while, and then I took a break, and then it's sort of good to get back into it. But I think I think I'm under 20 in the PB now, somewhere between 10 and 20, potentially maybe even 12 from the last time I did it. But I mean, it's been months, so it's it's kind of goes out the window somewhat. But it's going to be fun to get de-rusted on it and sort of get back into sort of figuring out what's what.
I want to actually go on to that. I think that'd be a good time. We spoke just prior to starting about the health or mental aspects of these runs. Could you go into that in any way you want to start that?
Yeah, of course. So no-hit running is very much, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is in my opinion is it's a personal journey, not both skill but also in terms of your mind and mentality and sort of where you're at and your ability to sort of be resilient against adverse things, right? It's sort of the particularly if you're getting hit all the time, it's very easy to take it to heart, right? I've been guilty of getting very angry about things happening in game or upset, because I got hit by Cinder again and it's been 6 times now, sort of thing. It's like, am I ever going to do this kind of thing? That's really hard to overcome. It's sometimes you have to take a step back and remember that it doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter if you if you get hit all the time. It's in the end of the day, it's a personal journey and it's supposed to be fun, right? But I guess the one of the harder things is once you taste that that no hit run when you finally get it, it's particularly sweet. You know, particularly the first time. You know, it feels like nothing else that I've really experienced in gaming. You know, as I mentioned, I've had some pretty bad stuff going on with my health, and I had to take time off. In particular, I lost feeling in my hands for 2 months, so I couldn't really play anyway. I was forced to take time off. Thankfully, feeling in my hands have come back, but I have a number of issues with my lower back, as well as some other stuff going on in my neck as well. And it's just, you know, that in itself has made it hard to sort of sit down in front of the PC for a long period of time, right? So I was sort of forced to take time off, but I can say this much, you know, after taking a break for so long, I feel so much better, you know, so... You know, and I felt like I've had a good time to reflect on everything that's been going on, and, you know, and on the runs that I've been doing. And in particular, I mean, not necessarily this round of time off, but I did take time off throughout the Dark Souls 3 stuff. And as I mentioned, I moved away from the all base game bosses to SL1. I got the SL1 run and then moved back to all base game bosses. And it's crazy how much of a difference those breaks can make, because the SL1 indirectly affected my skill level of Dark Souls 3. And even though, you know, it was sort of like, it was a number of bosses I was familiar with, I was just sort of learning a different way to fight them. But when I went back to all base game bosses, I got the run within a few days after that. And the break was really everything I needed, you know, to sort of feel better about that run. But also just the time off from doing these runs or playing something else, you have this sort of mental battle between, particularly if you're a streamer, you know, I'm a Twitch partner, and I worked really hard to get that, but you know, you don't want to let people down that watch you. You also don't want to lose all the momentum you've gained as a streamer. So maybe you don't want to stop doing no hit for a while, right? You know, it can sort of force you into this loop where you're constantly like banging your head against a wall, and not always healthy, you know. So, you know, taking a break and giving yourself time to breathe and just not think about this and not, you know, smash your head against the same wall over and over can make a big difference, and really can actually improve the run ultimately, right? It's particularly if you give stuff a time to settle. It can, even if you come back and it's months later and you're de-rusting again, you know, that in itself I found didn't really, you know, I felt like even doing that, the pressure was off when I was de-rusting, because it was a de-rust, right? Like I wasn't going for the run. It was just, I was just, you know, getting back into the groove. So, you know, with a fresh, clear head after the time, I think that's really important. It can be, you know, it really can be mentally overwhelming. You see, I've seen examples of it in all the runners I've watched where they, you know, I don't know that there's even, maybe Squilla is the only guy I've watched that maybe you don't really see it on stream, but you know, you look at the way like particularly, you know, if you look at Hob or Nico, the way some of the God Run 2 has affected these guys at times, it's you know, it's really hard, because you're trying to be there for these people and, you know, tell them that, you know, they're doing an amazing job, but it's really hard for, you know, it's sort of, it can feel like it's never going to happen. And that in itself is, you know, or that you're just like literally, you know, kicking a dead horse, you know, like, or beating a dead horse at that point, you know. And these, especially these marathon run achievements, you know, there's a reason only 2 people have it. Like, you know, because it is that difficult and there's so much variance and potential for error. That's why it's so impressive. But you know, you see, it can be really hard, and it's a sort of thing that can stop somebody from being happy. You know, it can have a really severe effect on your mental health. And that's you know, the healthier your mental health is, and the more you can keep yourself sort of fresh, I think that's going to play itself into the importance of how easy you find it to get these runs. You know, the more negative clouds you have over a certain run or something like that, I feel like the less likely it is you get the run then, right? Because you sort of, it's a vicious cycle of sort of feeling down about something, pushing on again, and then getting beaten down again, and then trying again, and then getting beaten down again. And eventually, you know, it can be, it made me feel plenty bad. You know what I mean? It's sort of, particularly with the DS3 any percent. I actually don't feel bad at all now. And, you know, like I mentioned, Bloodborne, I was pretty quick to get that. DS2, I actually got this year as well, which wasn't on my list of games that I actually wanted to even run this year. But we did a tournament with the Team Widers, and that was Deathless, and I just sort of moved on from that to Hitless, and I was lucky enough to get that. So, but at no point did I really feel like, you know, I sort of approached it as anytime I got hit was an opportunity to sort of learn why I got hit and just refined it, you know. And I feel like that at the beginning, I didn't really understand that that's what I needed to do, because I was so ingrained in following the right strats and this and that and the other, you know. And, you know, now that I've gotten myself into a mindset where it's like, okay, if something isn't working, just to identify that it's not working and find a way to, you know, find something that works for you, because we're lucky enough to have, you know, people in the community that make saves, you know, save state, you know, tools where you can go in and run the same section over and over. And if something isn't working, it makes more sense, especially even if you're on stream, to just stop and practice. Because ultimately, if you find something that works, you're going to get that boost of confidence and good feeling just from working something out yourself that works well. And, you know, especially if it's something that seems to be happening in a run, but not when you're practicing, finding out why is giving you knowledge that you can use to overcome it. So, like, for example, in Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, you know, those two in particular, I don't know, did I do any other runs this year? No, probably not yet. Sekiro is the next one. But in those two in particular, in comparison between those and say Dark Souls 3, particularly the any percent, like my ability to deal with the hits and things like that really I had to really change my perspective, you know, before I was able to do that. And sometimes only a break will let you reflect enough to do that. So, yeah, I think I can't understate the importance of mental health in getting these runs, and particularly even in streaming. You know, there's a lot of weight placed on things like Twitch partner and things like that honestly shouldn't be. It's, in the end of the day, you know, like I can speak, you know, as a Twitch partner, it's, you know, it's like it's a great achievement, but, you know, like I'm no different really to, you know, anybody else that's on Twitch streaming. You know, it feels the same to me, you know. It's validation of something that I achieved at some point. Okay, yes, and then somebody at Twitch said yes to my application, right? But in the end of the day, like, I mean, I've been off streaming for quite some time, and you know, I recently played through Kana Bridge of Spirits, that new game that came out, which was great, by the way. But the, you know, my view counts were, you know, way below what would be required to hit partner, you know, that sort of thing. But the thing is, it's like, you know, the people get so tied up in these metrics that it can be very, very difficult to, you know, particularly, especially if you add the stress of that to then doing no-hit runs and everything else. It can be a really bad cycle for mental health. So that's why it's super important to try and stay, you know, stay as healthy as possible and do what you can to sort of keep yourself in good spirits and find ways to overcome the adversity in a way that doesn't make you like upset or angry, because that just doesn't help in the end.
Just want to ask one thing about the break, or not really ask one thing about the break aspects, but the just to point out about the break aspects, that you took a break, but it was also not even from the game itself or from streaming. Like, you went to like SL1. So taking a break can either mean like a different game or just a general break, or it can be a different run within the same game. Like, there can be various ways to set yourself away from the run if a run's given you it's not doing well.
Absolutely. Your brain has a you know, it can have more capacity for something different, right? Like, if a change of pace in itself can be all you need. You know, it could be that you're doing, you know, you say you're doing all base game bosses and you're doing great with the any percent, but you're not doing something, you're not doing well with Osiris like I was. Moving on to say maybe you do like a pyromancy run, or you do, like a magic run or something that's just the any percent again, or you move on to a different game, you do something a little bit different. It can be, rewarding, and also, that can also do great things for your mental health. If you're having some success somewhere else, that I totally agree. There's different ways to approach the whole break, but giving yourself some space from whatever's, negatively impacting your health in that way, particularly if you're getting stuck, like I mentioned. Yeah, there's definitely ways to do it without just like going away from streaming and playing it altogether, for sure. I was more just forced into that myself, but it was I found that the breaks certainly helped me.
We mentioned a minute ago about events participated in with Team Widers. Could you describe what Team Widers is and how it came to be?
Yeah, definitely. It's changed a lot since its inception. Initially, it was really just sort of a fun team. In terms of when I initially made the team, it was just, there was a lot of people using these wide peepo happy emotes across Twitch, and I sort of made a Team Widers just because everybody was sort of like talking about it. It was just ultimately it was just a sort of casual team. People were just invited friends to initially, right? But there's some much more, driven people in the community when it comes to the teams and stuff like that. Such as Naz and the other members of the Widers that are sort of running the show there now, that had better ideas for it than that. And personally, I didn't have the bandwidth really to contribute to that, so it sort of moved on to them, and they've taken it in such a direction whereby they spend a lot of time now promoting up and helping smaller streamers to sort of grow, and also sort of try and promote community involvement, as well as they have events now which are, a lot of the time now charity focused, doing good work across, to try and do stuff for great causes and things like that. So that's sort of how it changed. It was initially just sort of for me personally, it was just a sort of like a casual team where I was just going to add my friends to, but ultimately it had a bigger impact than that. And it's, there's a lot of, I've met a lot of great people in the team, and they continue to grow the team and help. The community is quite rich in terms of the members and the support they give to each other. Sort of a rising tides raise all ships, I think is the saying. I feel like that's really the benefit of Team Widers, especially if they can do a lot of charity stuff. So definitely cool stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say on the charity aspects, from what I've seen, and I don't have a sort of amount, at minimum, the events associated with them have raised over $10,000 pounds. I'm not exactly sure of the figure, but minimum of that. So
it would probably be USD, I would imagine, just based on where they're at. But yeah, that alone is super cool, right? Like the more that we can all do to sort of help people in need like that, it's pretty fulfilling in terms of life things that you can do, I think.
I can't remember what the details of, but did you shave your head for charity, or I can't remember the detail.
Yeah. So there was a point in time, was it this year? It was still this year. Yeah. Okay. Jeez. Yeah. So at the beginning of the year, we did some charity work personally. This was separate from any teams, but this was for cure rare disease, which essentially the disease, to be honest, look, the name escapes me. I think it was, is it MND? I'm just trying to remember. Basically, the disease causes like like people to be crippled to a point where they can't walk or do anything. And this poor boy is in this position whereby, this has happened, and the person that runs Cure Rare Disease, it's like their brother, I believe. It's been a little while since I was involved with the charity, so I'm just trying to think back. There's been a number of health things I've been involved with this year, so they're mixing up in my brain. So I don't mean to do any discredit to the charity, because it is for an amazing cause. But basically the research that they're trying to do may be able to give this boy a chance to live a normal life if they can find a cure that allows him to run and walk and play with his friends and everything like that. And so we did some charity work earlier this year to bring attention to that. And the community alone, I was able to raise it was close to, if not over, $1,500 from memory in a single 4-hour stream. I was pretty humbled by that for sure. It was and that stretch, one of the goals was that I would shave my head. So that's one of the things that we did. I actually still owe a couple of goals to the to the community, which I think I've forgotten to do at this point. But but look, I mean, in terms of that, there was I can't be more thankful for the generosity of people, and it just goes to show when we come together how much we can achieve.
Did you let people like people you work with or family know you were doing this prior? I'm just imagining going next day and just going, oh, you've checked.
Well, at the time, at the beginning of the year, I was still living with my mum and dad just due to the COVID stuff, and there was really no reason for me to move out at that point in time, just because of the way the things were. It was sort of easier to be around people than not, right? Especially here in Australia and Melbourne, we've been in the longest amount of lockdowns in the world out of everywhere. So, spent quite a lot of time not being able to go further than 5 kilometers from my house in between, no later than 8 p.m. So it's been pretty rough in that regard. But I didn't let them know at the beginning that I was doing the charity stuff. It was just sort of after that I gave my dad the honor of being able to shave my head, which he was thrilled by because he thought it was incredibly funny. But he also was super proud. Obviously, I said, look, I did this. I raised this money. One of the incentives was that I would shave my head. So guess what? You get to shave my head, and you know what? It wasn't so bad. It was, and I also did a makeup stream, which was, eye-opening to say the least. So yeah, but it was fun, and that's the sort of thing that brings community together. And, look, I mean, I can grow new hair. It's no big deal, it's, but the, that just the money we raised, I was really proud of and very thankful for the community, to have done that, because it's the very least that I could do to sort of, try and help. And it's really, we've done a number of charity incentives throughout the time of the channel. We've done some stuff for wildlife in Australia where we raised hundreds of dollars towards, to sort of help animal relocation after fires here in Australia. Yeah. That in itself, for me, I mean, animals can't help themselves, that's, for me, that's always even almost more important to me, because it's just devastating tragedy for whenever I see something like that. But, there's so many different aspects where helping people is, it's, as I say, it's one of the more fulfilling things you can do in life, I think. So it's, I'm very proud of all the opportunities that we've had to do that, and, definitely looking forward to doing more in that regard. But yeah, that was the one that we did where I shaved my head and things like that. That was particularly for cure rare disease. So that's something that's definitely worth looking into if you want to, get involved with something like that.
Something else I noted down that you'd participated in was which I think was quite a while ago now, was the Mortal Shell tournament. I was just interested how that came about, because that was pretty soon after it was released, I believe.
Yeah, in fact, before it was released. So we were lucky enough to be approached by PlayStack Games, I believe it is, that are the developers of Mortal Shell. Am I saying the wrong name? Hang on, let me just grab the case to make sure. Sorry. So PlayStack, I think is the publisher. Cold Symmetry is the developer, but I have the enhanced deluxe edition on PS5 here, because I bought it all because I was lucky enough for them to give me early access to the demo as well as the game, the full game. So yeah, essentially involvement with the no-hit community and Dark Souls in particular. I was lucky enough to be involved with a group of people that got early access to Mortal Shell. We started off by doing a Deathless run sort of tournament that was sort of a small portion of the game, sort of kind of like the network tests of Dark Souls, I guess, but not network based, because there's no PvP or anything in Mortal Shell, or at least there wasn't then, if there is now. But the looking at the what's it called? We basically had to clear the area and move on, right? And you would take deaths based on whatever you did, or the score based on deaths. And that was sort of the first little snapshot we got. And then when it came to the full release, we did also release tournaments. So at that point, we had keys to give away. We also had, you could run it with armor or without. Mortal Shell is essentially, if you run it without armor, it's essentially hitless. You can only take one hit and you die. So but you get a boost of like almost infinite stamina. Almost, it's like a tons of stamina if you don't wear a shell. So Mortal Shell is a little bit different in that you can sort of possess a certain character, I guess, in that a shell, right? And that is sort of how you get your weapon and everything like that. There's maybe a couple of weapons that work for one character or something like that, but they all have different characteristics. Some are balanced in they're a bit heavier, but you get more HP, or you take less damage, whereas some are more agile and do different things, and you get different move sets. So it's really interesting concept, and I actually really enjoyed the game. But yeah, we got to get involved and sort of run that sort of thing. And in terms of what we ended up doing, I didn't end up actually having time to run the full game in the final test for one reason or another. And the reason being there, I think, is because for whatever reason, like I just wasn't able to run the full game up until that point and learn it all. So we did run a limited run at the beginning, sort of of the tournament, where you would sort of do the first two bosses, the first two main bosses, I guess you could say, which was heaps of fun. And yeah, definitely huge thanks to Cole Symmetry for giving us access to that at the time. It's definitely a very cool, considering the size of the dev team as well. It was super cool experience to sort of play something new that hadn't been out, and also sort of raise awareness for the game, because it was it was pretty fun sort of take on and for that almost like Souls-like genre, I guess, and being able to sort of take the experience from Souls and sort of see what you feel about this game, which is sort of akin to Souls in that way.
Last thing I want to go into is around live streaming, and there's a couple of things. One thing you've already brought up is the huge positive contribution that can happen with like the charity aspects, with those sorts of things. But I was also interested in what is it about, I don't know if active live streaming is the right way of defining it, but what is it about live streaming that drew you to start doing and keeps you doing?
Well, look, I mean, live streaming itself was... I to be honest, to begin with, I wanted to be a YouTuber, right? Like or I wanted to make YouTube videos, I guess, rather than be a YouTuber. I guess that's not really the right phrase, but my initial journey in streaming started on YouTube. I used to watch streamers over on YouTube. In fact, one of the first streamers I ever watched was his name is Kang Gaming. He's a variety streamer. Typically, he does a lot of Animal Crossing now, I think, but at the time, back when I initially watched him, he would typically play DBD, but he also did various variety mixed in with that. And he was actually the first person I ever saw live stream at all. But the first thing I watched him play was Resident Evil 7. And I realized how much I loved it, because I probably wouldn't at the time have played Resident Evil 7 on my own, because I would have been just too scared, or it wasn't my type of game, like it looked pretty scary to me, and I was pretty casual in terms of my gaming at the time. It was one of those things where I was like, I get to enjoy this game with a community, and sort of go through this and realize how much I sort of love that idea. And then I really wanted to sort of do that myself in some way. And then the adpocalypse happened, and it sort of ruined his channel to some extent. But he had amassed over like 100K followers on YouTube, or subscribers. But he ultimately, he was unable to sustain his work anymore on there, and he was able to move over to Twitch, which in turn meant I signed up for a channel on Twitch. And that is sort of how that started. Once that got to a point where it was, it was sort of working to some point, I sort of started dabbling in like, okay, well, how do I record video? How do I do, how do I record gameplay? And, sort of from there, that's when I got into, I wanted to be able to share these experiences with other people, because I think it sort of opened up the possibilities for what I would play and the enjoyment I could have with streaming. In overall, I felt like that community aspect that I had experienced with Kang, and the fact that I'd gotten to enjoy a game that I otherwise probably wouldn't have played on my own really appealed to me. And I feel like I don't go out partying, I don't do all that sort of stuff really very much, especially with the pandemic and everything, right? But I'm pretty much at home a lot of the time, and so for me this is a sort of social outlet that suits me really well. And I've been able to meet people from all over the world. Some of the people that I call my closest friends now are from other countries, and I sort of know that even though we can't necessarily spend time in person together, I probably spend more time with these people than I would if I knew them in person. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's sort of because I have the time to, be with them in their streams and things like that. So it's that to me is what drew me to streaming and keeps me coming back is the people. In the end of the day, will I no-hit run forever? I don't know. For me at the moment, I'm sort of, my interest is also in, okay, well, with Elden Ring coming out, and, I was able to get a lot of footage from Elden Ring's network test, I'm using this opportunity to start learning more about YouTube. Now that I'm, the streaming side of things I've learned a lot about video and that sort of thing. Now I want to sort of use that high quality recordings and things like that, and the ability to try and maybe put that back into YouTube as well, right? And to try and offer content that might be enjoyable in short form for people, where I can write a script and knock that down into sort of that position. So it's interesting because, originally, as I say, I wanted to do retro stuff on stream, and that's kind of what I wanted to do for YouTube to begin with as well, right? Play through my favorite old games with people. Right. But now it's sort of at the point now where it's like, okay, well, it'd be really cool to be able to, it's great to play stuff on stream with people, and I don't want to stop doing that. But maybe I want to do more in terms of experiencing games with people, even though I do want to do a lot of no-hit at the moment. And that is my primary focus. Being able to hopefully, in the end, experience these games and more of them, more about them, like with a community that I can build between Twitch and YouTube, that to me is appealing. And the community aspect and, enjoying these games with other people is really what draws me to streaming and video content creation in general. So that's really where I'm at.
I saw a picture of, it might be outdated at this point, but of your equipment, which looks very nice, and was interested in how, say a new streamer wanted to start streaming, how would you prioritize equipment?
The first and foremost, sound is way more important than people think. You can deal with bad video more than you can deal with bad sound, right? Like that's so I would say, initially speaking, it's pretty easy to get acceptable video, but if whereas I would personally be investing in audio first. If it were me, obviously you need a streaming setup that can work, but if somebody's trying to start off and on a budget and things like that, getting an NVIDIA card that supports NVENC, I think the lowest end one is a 1660 or something like that. It's probably the first place I'd start. If you can't afford that, you can do CPU encoding, but GPU encoding will mean that you probably get a better experience and it not impact your games if you're doing PC gaming. If you're a console streamer, obviously you can direct stream from a console with something like Lightstream for overlays and stuff like that if you want to, or you can plug a camera into your console. But if you're looking to do it as a, as you get into it more and you want to take something to maybe the next step beyond just the very basic of a camera and just the gameplay, yeah, I would say that you probably want to look at sound as the first thing, because it's, in my opinion, the hardest thing to get looking good or sounding good, I guess, in terms of, there's so much to know that is really hard to control, like the room, for example, right? At the moment, my room's not treated very well, and I'm just constantly fighting with my audio to try and find the right level of compression without bringing the noise floor up. And there's a ton to learn, but you don't have to spend a ton of money to get good audio. But people can tell if you're just on like a tiny headset microphone that's sounds like you're, the sort of the captain of a plane talking to you over the PA, like that. That's that people will. I think people subconsciously like that less than they might dislike poor video quality, right? Like, or low bitrate streams. So I would say that as a beginner, if I was getting into it again, I would be recommending, investing time into the sound of your stream, because the video you can sort of get away with lower quality video to begin with. I would also say, personally, I prefer streamers with a camera, though. I feel like it's easier to not talk as much if you have a camera than if you don't. So, as you're starting as a streamer, if you don't have a camera, you've got to talk a lot, right? Because anybody can just stream a game and not talk, right? Like, that doesn't offer anything entertainment wise, really. Like, maybe to some people, they just want commentary-free gameplay. Fair enough. But in my experience, that's, from what I've seen, that's a harder niche to sort of crack into, but there's people out there that do great. Squilla doesn't have a camera for a lot of the time, right? So he's only recently started having the camera so much, so as far as I'm aware. So but look, you do have to, streaming in itself when you begin is about getting comfortable with talking a lot and not being, nervous about embarrassing yourself and stuff like that. We're all going to do stupid stuff on long form content. It's that's the point, and that's why you're there to have fun with people. But it really can be difficult to, just as you begin to learn, that you need to talk a lot. So yeah, sometimes a little webcam or something like that can at least can keep people sort of attached to who you are in a certain way, but also then, sound quality as well goes a long way.
One thing I wrote down, but I can't remember where I found this, so it may not be true and I've just written it down wrongly, but is it true you have viewer count disabled?
Yes. Yeah, I do personally. So look, I mean, one thing I hear from friends and I see all across, Reddit and Twitter and things like that is people worried about the viewer count. It can be very detrimental, again, going back to the mental health side of things. If you're looking at the viewer count, I knew somebody that would constantly look at their viewer count and their mood would fluctuate based on the viewer count. They would see that they had 25 people watching them and they'd be like, oh, this is great, and they would talk more. And then the viewer count would fluctuate down and they would be like, well, what did I do wrong? And they'd be analyzing themselves straight away. And it just, you need to, with streaming, you need to just treat the people that are there with you as people. They're investing the time into you, that they could be doing something else with, and each person is valuable, all right, in that they're a human being with life, and they're taking the time out of their day to spend their time with you, and so if you're just looking at that number and you're just like, oh, you just want a high number, in my opinion, you're not doing it right. Like it's the sort of thing, it's like really what you're there for is the community interaction. So for me, turning the view count off was a good way of me being like, okay, look, I'm just going to talk to the people that talk to me. If there are people watching that don't want to talk, that's fine. But ultimately your community is, you just want to value all of the people the same, but you need to, you need to treat each of these people with the respect they deserve. And in that, viewing them as a number is really, for me, it just, it was very easy to get caught up in the fact that, this view count is high, view count is low. It's sort of like I will have a look after the stream and I'll see my average because it just usually gets emailed through to me. I think the something that when I saw that and the view count was really impacting this guy, and his mood would just like flop if something went wrong. For me it was really sort of like, it just really solidified in my mind how it's interesting to just, I know then this is all developed by Twitch, right? Because they have these goals that are measured of metrics of success, quote unquote, where it's like, okay, you need to have this many viewers to get this, and then if you have this many viewers, then you can apply to be a partner, and it's like, okay, well, it's one of those things where these measures of success are not necessarily healthy. Do you know what I mean? It's, some days I might get no followers, some days I might get 20 followers, it's sort of, it varies wildly, but these numbers, the real success in streaming is growing a community that you enjoy spending your time with. And that's the most important aspect. And if you treat them as, if you're just treating them as numbers, I think maybe your mind is in the wrong place, or your sort of like priorities are a little skewed. And it's not necessarily at the fault of the person that's experiencing this, right? It's what social media ingrains in people with these if you've got a high follower count, you can do this, you can get verified, and that's sort of the opportunity is there to do it for sure. Like, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with taking that opportunity when the time comes, but that's the reason I have the view count turned off, because I didn't want to treat people like a number in the end. People wanted to talk to me, they come in, they take the time to say hello to me. I want to be able to learn about them and their day, and I've met many friends from it. So it's it's super important for me to just, it's not important about the view count in the end, right? If there's 0 people, sure. But, like in the end of the day, that I'm in it for the community side of things. So if there was 0 people, I think I might start to get a little bit worried, but it's the sort of thing whereby, the more if you treat everybody the same, whether or not there's 1,000 people there or there's 20 people there, I think that's better, and that is going to actually grow the community more than if you're just always up when the views are up and you're down when the views are down.
I also don't have the viewer visible. I turn it off as well. Just interested in your thoughts on it. And because similar thoughts of the only, like, obviously there are many cases where we sort of talk to ourselves, but on all the other cases, the only people who are interacting are people who are chatting. So even if you have 20, 30, 40, insert number, watching, it's only sort of the people who are messaging within that chat who, matter's the wrong word, but I think you know what I mean in terms of they are the focus.
Yeah, I mean, so the conversation, like the people that are talking there are really the, you're not getting interaction out of a lurker, right? And that's the actual engagement from, or the chat engagement that you get is obviously only ever going to be from those that want to talk.
Yeah.
So that's not relative to the view count at all.
The last thing I want to ask is sort of random, but I had to ask about context, and then we'll move into some quick questions to finish.
Okay.
It's a clip I found whilst doing research for this of downing a drink from a shoe.
Oh God. Okay, there. That's from the charity stream. Okay, so yeah, so a shoey is an Australian thing. So it's essentially you pour your drink into a shoe and drink it, like scull it out of a. So like you have to drink the whole drink out of the shoe, like pretty much. And yeah, it was the first incentive off of the charity incentives from memory, or it was the first or second. I think maybe like the first like $100 or something like that was like I gifted a 5-pack or a 10-pack of subs to chat, and then I think at $200 or something, It was the Shoey, which is a traditional Australian ritual whereby you drink the alcoholic drink via a shoe. But people love that for some reason. I didn't. It was, but even though it was a new shoe as well, like because the shoes I wear are like these. I just have these Nike ones with like a mesh top, and the drink would have just come out of the mesh top. So like I was like, oh, you know, like I have to buy some new shoe for this, and it was the most. It just added this real weird taste, probably of because I just pulled it off a shelf at the store. So God knows how many people had tried this shoe on before I drank a drink out of it. So yeah, the things we do for charity. But you know, look, it was funny at least.
I find it funny. I've had this like same reaction off a couple of guests when I've started the question like that. So I saw on a clip and it's always been
yeah. I wondered because like there's a lot of clips that don't exist anymore because of you know, the whole DMCA thing. But and I didn't save any of them in the end. Which is kind of sad because like there's a ton of clips of like old things like. My first Deathless run of DS3 is gone because of the DMCA and everything along those lines, and I really didn't want to lose my Twitch channel, you know. So it was sort of like that. But yeah, it's I was thinking like there's some real embarrassing clips that went, and I'm kind of glad. But I was like, oh god, what have you found?
If one game could be released tomorrow, either an announced, unannounced, or a sequel to a game you don't think is going to ever exist, what game would it be?
Well, I mean, having played a tiny bit of Elden Ring, that's probably my obvious choice. But like if I could have Elden Ring tomorrow and it was done, sweet. You know, I'd love to play it. It's I can't stop thinking about it because it was so good. But if I was to talk about anything I'd like to see, just thinking like. I would love to see the Metal Gear series come back with something that was good. I feel like ever since Hideo Kojima left Konami, Metal Gear Solid 5 is, you know, infamously unfinished. You get to a certain point in the game and it just doesn't get resolved, basically, which is interesting. And then they released Metal Gear Survive, which was just terrible. You know, it's just a cash grab, really. So I'd love to see something from the Metal Gear series. I'd love to be. A lot of people want remakes of Metal Gear Solid 1 or something like that in like a new, you know, like a modern thing, sort of like Blue Point's Demon Souls, right? But for me, it's sort of, you know, I like the new experiences where possible. So I'd love to see like a new Metal Gear game that's somewhere in the timeline that we haven't explored yet, because there's such a convoluted story. You know, for me, if there was something that was unannounced that I wanted to see, probably be that would probably be my next thing along, I guess. Also, Bloodborne Kart, obviously.
Oh, so. Of course. That's a bit of a variation on that, just because we started with retro games at the start. If one game that could be remastered, remade, or just updated with modern graphics, what game would it be?
I'd love to see the maybe I'd love to see like maybe the N64 Zeldas as you know, in like a modern style, maybe similar to Breath of the Wild. That would be cool because of the atmosphere of the game. As I mentioned, Metal Gear Solid 1 would also be another one that would be really cool. I'm trying to think if there's any others. Obviously, we've seen Crash Bandicoot re-released in the modern era, and it was pretty good. I'm trying to think, what did I play when I was younger that I would want re-released? I think that would probably be it. I'd say the Zelda games for me. I've played the 3DS versions, and I mean, it's 3DS, so, you know, even though it's higher resolution than the N64, it's still on a tiny screen. So that for me is sort of like being able to play that in like a fully fledged remake that's like, you know, got the whole thing would be cool. But at the same time, I often think to myself, you know, does this offer me the same sort of nostalgia like feeling? Like there's a lot of room for devs to sort of not capture that same feeling, you know, like that's the danger I feel of re-releasing something that, especially when you get to that sort of age. You know, something that you sort of accept its faults for the time. Whereas the you know, if a game comes out, this is you know, just going back to Demon Souls, the Bluepoint remake of Demon Souls on PS5. I feel like people were a little disappointed that they kept the mechanics all the same as the 2009 release, because, you know, the combat system of Dark Souls 3 was probably the newest sort of Souls combat system at that point, when Demon Souls was re-released. And, you know, the graphics were polished and everything looked amazing, and it was this stunning showpiece for the PS5. And then you had the, you know, the AI and wonkiness of a PS3 first attempt at a Souls title, you know, sort of bolted on. Like the graphics are sort of bolted onto that experience. So even though, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, I feel like that they didn't modernize the experience enough, and that maybe is nostalgic for some people, but, you know, I think that there are a number of other people that feel like, you know, it could have probably been improved, you know, to sort of feel more polished and like the modern experience that we're used to with some of the newer games. Whereas if you go back and play the PS3 version of Demon Souls, it's like the graphics sort of suit the jankiness to the gameplay, if that makes sense, and you sort of accept it for what it is. Whereas the new one, it's sort of like, you know, and that sort of thing. Like it's like, oh, I really wish they had improved this part, you know, because the graphics look so good.
It's made me think. It might be an easy question, but it also might be quite a harsh question. If on the 25th of February, when Elden Ring comes out, if Breath of the Wild sequel was released on that same day too, which game would you go for first?
Elden Ring. It's no question.
Okay.
So the difference is that, so the sequel to Breath of the Wild, to me, like, it's exciting, but there's obviously the sort of like prequel that they released, which is
the Hyrule
the Hyrule Warriors. Yeah, so the I forget exactly what it is. Age of Calamity. That's right. And despite how much I love Breath of the Wild, that game didn't really appeal to me that much. And no doubt I'm going to play the sequel to Breath of the Wild, but I can tell you now, like, Elden Ring felt like Breath of the Wild, but turned up to 10. Like, I feel like they did so much. And also the story for me of Elden Ring, it's so much more mysterious to me than Breath of the Wild, because it's a new IP. We don't know what's going on. There's obviously tons that they haven't shown that's going to happen, right? Like I feel like there's twists and stuff in there that just simply won't, you know, we won't have seen anything of in any previews or anything along those lines, right?
Gwyn appearing and
yeah, exactly. So it's you know, there's a lot there which, you know, feels real like I want to know what's actually going on here, and I know I'm going to spend more time in the game. But then the sequel to Breath of the Wild, you know, it's sort of like, I understand that there's mystery there, but, you know, it's fairly clear from the trailers that Ganondorf is there. We didn't actually win at the end of Breath of the Wild, spoiler alert. You know, the Dark Beast Ganon fight was potentially underwhelming for a reason, and I get that, but like, I sort of know what to expect of Breath of the Wild sequel. Whereas with Elden Ring, you know, I'm offered this PC experience with, you know, these gorgeous sort of like vistas of life, but also of danger and the difficulty. And, you know, I feel like Zelda is sort of like the Breath of the Wild is like almost like a light, easy version of that. Now, having played a bit of Elden Ring, so yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm looking forward to both, and I play them both. But I know that, you know, when the original Breath of the Wild came out, it was sort of the same date as Horizon Zero Dawn, and I wanted to play both of those. And I played Breath of the Wild, and then I tried to play Horizon a little bit, and I just had to give myself some space between the two, because I was just too engrossed in Breath of the Wild and expected too much out of Horizon at that point. And I feel like the same thing would probably happen with Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild sequel. I think I would be expecting more from, say, the combat system of Breath of the Wild, which I'm probably not going to get. Do you know what I mean? Because it's Zelda and it's not Hidetaka Miyazaki's craziness. So yeah. and all that. So yeah, I mean, definitely a tough question, because I would want to get into both. But look, I mean, my interest firmly planted in Elden Ring at the moment.
And I think it should be fine anyway, because they haven't even released the name of The Legend of Zelda, so I think it'll be much later in the year.
Yeah, look, and I mean, it's going to be fine. I think it's going to be a long game. Not to say that I don't think Elden Ring is going to be long. I think that Zelda will probably be longer overall. But you know, like I sort of my interest is when they announced the sequel to Breath of the Wild was the same day they announced Elden Ring at E3, right? It's literally it was the same day they announced it, and I didn't even care about Dark Souls at all. I didn't even know what Elden Ring was when they announced them both. So I was so excited for the sequel to Breath of the Wild. I was like, what's this Elden Ring? Who cares? Anyway, here we are. It's, 2 or 3 years later or whatever. I think it was 2019 E3, I think. So 2.5 years ago. And yeah, now we're in this position where, I couldn't be more excited for Elden Ring and Zelda. I'm just kind of like, yeah, when it comes out, I'll play it, sort of thing.
If I said most hyped or celebrated moment on stream, what would be the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, the no-hit run of Dark Souls 3, no doubt. It was such an overwhelming moment, relief and just, happiness and joy and, in the community sort of all sort of there, everybody that I'm friends with, was there to sort of celebrate this moment with me. And, after, as I said, 6 or 7 times of getting there without getting the run, it was just, it was a moment in time that I really will never forget. It was really a turning point for me in that I knew I could finally do it. I finally got to say the words, the whole, the tradition of sort of saying the whole game name and then no hit run and sort of just being able to sort of, it's almost like that eureka moment, right? In science, it's sort of, it's very, it was sort of overwhelming in that respect, but it was easily the most hyped moment for sure, right? Even anything that's come after that, each time you get a new no hit run for sure, you get that wave, but I don't know if the only time I think that the only thing that would necessarily beat that first one is probably when you move on to marathon. I guess that, I feel like people get super excited when you get another run, and that's cool. But I feel like when you start adding games, like for example, if I was to do the trilogy, Dark Souls trilogy, 1, 2, and 3, I feel like at the end of that, it's like, oh, he's on game 3 now. It's like the community sort of starts to rumble a little bit. People hear about it, and sort of more people come in, and I feel like that wave may actually sort of people have more warning for it as well. You know what I mean? It's sometimes it's like, when you're in an any percent run, it's like, you've got, True's got 2 more splits.
Come out
and
of
it's
nowhere
like, yeah, okay, maybe, yeah, you get like a couple more people get in. Whereas like if you're getting close and it's like, oh, I'm getting to get, you've gotten to game 3 like a couple of times in the last couple of days. It's like, oh, it's going to game 3 now, it's, more people come in and sort of tie onto that. So I feel like that would probably be the next step for where I feel like that emotion would be there. However, I think if there was an opportunity at a world's first on Elden Ring, that also might be a big moment, right? Like that's that might also garner some attention, and where it might be a big thing. You know what I mean?
And my final question is, what's in the future plans of trus0und?
Well, as I mentioned, this year I was really focused on hopefully going from, I wanted to, at the beginning of the year, I had not done the SL1 or all base game bosses yet, I believe. I was still trying to do those. I think I got them earlier in the year. Yeah. So this year I was able to get the SL1 run, the all base game bosses. I was also able to get Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne done of the any percents on those runs. Now working on Sekiro. I'm taking quite a bit of a break because the aim for this year was to get Sekiro, Demon Souls, and then maybe Dark Souls 3 all bosses plus DLC. I'm hoping just to get Sekiro done really by the end of the year, and then probably move into DS3 again at that point. I think I'll probably wait on Demon Souls because I feel like Dark Souls 3 probably be the best to sort of get prepared for the mechanics of Elden Ring. Obviously, Elden Ring in February. We're going to spend a lot of time on Elden Ring next year. And then I think at that point, I may either go for Demon Souls and or the trilogy, all right? Get Dark Souls 1 done and then try and get 1, 2, and 3 back to back, maybe. But yeah, there's that. And then that's on the streaming side. And then, as I said earlier, I want to start putting more effort into YouTube and learning how to make content that's better short form for people, and something people can look forward to in that regard. Really, those are my sort of goals at the moment.
And if people want to check you out, where would they be looking?
Literally trus0und, TRUS0UND, anywhere that you can find social media most of the time. So Twitter, I have Instagram I don't use, but YouTube, Twitch. Really, I'm on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. Twitch is my primary platform. Yeah, but just trus0und everywhere.
Lovely. True, I really appreciate the time, man. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. I hope you've enjoyed it as well, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And this was a long one, man.
Yeah,
We've been talking for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Hopefully it's not too long.
It's all good. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed it as well. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and shall catch you in the next episode. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to hear more with amazing guests, be sure to head over to youtube.com/WayOfLoci, Loki spelled with a C, or WayOfLoci.com/NoHitPodcast.